FAR.F2.M8.
Jenna, I think ratio analysis is one of the sneakiest topics in FAR. On the surface, it looks like memorizing formulas. But every time someone tries that, they end up staring at an exam question wondering, wait, why am I even calculating this ratio?
Exactly, Russell. The formulas are just tools. The real skill is recognizing what questions someone is trying to answer. Is the business making money? Can it pay its bills? Is it financially stable over the long term? Is management actually performing well? Once you know the question, the ratio becomes much easier to remember.
So instead of thinking about dozens of formulas, we should think about 4 conversations we're having with a company.
That's exactly how Becker organizes this module. Ratio analysis is about evaluating relationships among selected items in the financial statements. Those relationships help investors, lenders, and other interested parties understand a company's financial condition. Ratios become much more useful when they're compared to prior periods, competitors, or industry averages.
I like that. A ratio by itself is almost like hearing someone say, the temperature is 70. 70 what? Degrees, percent, dollars compared to what?
Perfect analogy, Russell. A ratio without context is just a number. The comparison is what creates meaning. Suppose a company's current ratio improved. That's interesting. But is it better than last year? Better than competitors? Better than what's typical for the industry? Those comparisons tell the story.
So our mental map starts with 4 buckets: profitability, liquidity, solvency, performance. Every ratio belongs somewhere.
Exactly. Let's walk through each one.
Profitability sounds pretty obvious. Did the company make money?
That's the heart of it. Becker describes profitability ratios as measures of the success or failure of an enterprise for a given period. Notice that wording, success or failure. They're answering whether the business model actually generates profits.
Here's an analogy. Imagine owning a restaurant. Every month you're buying food, paying employees, paying rent, and serving customers. Profitability asks whether all of that effort actually leaves money behind. If not, eventually nothing else matters.
That's a great way to think about it. A company can survive temporary problems with cash. It can even borrow money. But over time, businesses have to earn profits. That's why profitability ratios often become some of the first numbers analysts examine.
But here's where people sometimes get confused. A profitable company isn't automatically healthy.
Exactly. Imagine that same restaurant makes a nice profit every year. But tomorrow every bill comes due, and there's almost no cash available. The restaurant could still face serious financial trouble. That's where liquidity comes in.
Liquidity is basically asking, can you survive the near future?
Yes. Becker defines liquidity ratios as measures of a firm's short-term ability to pay maturing obligations. Notice those words. Short-term. Maturing obligations. Liquidity isn't about lifetime success. It's about handling today's bills.
I always picture someone checking the wallet. You might own $1 million house. That's wonderful. But if lunch costs $20 and your wallet is empty, you have a liquidity problem.
That's an excellent analogy. Your total wealth might be impressive, but liquidity asks whether your available resources are sufficient to meet obligations as they come due. Companies experience the same thing. They may own valuable factories or equipment while still struggling to pay suppliers or employees on time.
So, profitability asks, do you earn money? Liquidity asks, can you pay your bills? Different questions.
Completely different. And FAR likes testing that distinction.
Then comes solvency. This always felt like liquidity's older sibling.
That's actually a useful way to remember it. Liquidity focuses on the near future. Solvency focuses on the long term. According to Becker, solvency ratios measure security or protection for long-term creditors and investors.
So, if liquidity is asking whether I can pay next month's bills, solvency is asking whether this business is likely to remain standing years from now.
Exactly. Long-term lenders care whether the overall financial structure is sustainable. Can the company continue meeting its obligations over many years? Is the capital structure reasonable? Does the business appear financially stable? Those are solvency questions.
Here's another analogy. Imagine buying a car. Liquidity is asking whether you can make this month's payment. Solvency asks whether taking out that loan was financially responsible in the first place.
I like that. The analogy isn't perfect because companies have many different obligations, but it captures the time horizon beautifully. Liquidity equals today. Solvency equals tomorrow and beyond.
Then we arrive at performance metrics. At first, I thought those were just more profitability ratios wearing a different name.
It's easy to think that. But Becker separates them. Performance metrics evaluate operating performance and elements of a company's stock performance from the perspective of current and potential investors. So now we're stepping back and asking how effectively management is operating the business and how investors might evaluate that performance.
Almost like evaluating the coach instead of just the scoreboard.
Exactly. The scoreboard matters. But performance metrics also help explain how efficiently management produced those results.
So our mental map is becoming really simple. Profitability. Did we succeed? Liquidity. Can we survive today? Solvency. Can we survive tomorrow? Performance. How well are we actually operating?
That's the framework I'd want every FAR candidate carrying into the exam. If you recognize the category first, you'll usually recognize the ratio much faster.
Now, Becker also makes an important point that I think people skip. Ratios are comparisons. They're relationships, not isolated numbers.
Exactly. The outline specifically notes that an entity's ratios may be compared with its own prior periods, with competitors, or with industry averages. Without comparison, ratios lose much of their value.
Imagine a doctor saying, "Your blood pressure is this." Without knowing what's considered healthy, the number doesn't help much.
Exactly. Financial statement users are constantly asking, compared with what? Compared with last year? Compared with the industry? Compared with expectations? Those comparisons identify trends. And trends are often more informative than individual measurements.
Now, here's something Becker also points out that feels incredibly important. Ratios aren't perfect.
Far from it. One of the final topics in this module is the limitations of ratios. Although ratios are easy to compute, they're only as reliable as the underlying accounting information.
That's actually kind of obvious once someone says it. If the numbers going into the ratio have weaknesses, the ratio inherits those weaknesses.
Exactly. Becker specifically mentions estimates, historical costs, and fair values. Accounting requires judgment. Those judgments influence reported numbers. And ratios built from those numbers naturally reflect those judgments.
So, ratios aren't magic truth detectors. They're evidence. Helpful evidence. Not perfect evidence.
Well said. Another limitation Becker highlights is that additional information outside the ratios is often valuable. No analyst should rely exclusively on ratios. They should also understand the company's business, industry, and circumstances.
It's kind of like judging a baseball player using batting average alone. Helpful. Sure. Complete. Not even close.
That's a great analogy. Every metric explains part of the story, never the entire story.
Now, let's shift into variance analysis. I think people hear the word variance and immediately expect complicated calculations.
Fortunately, Becker keeps the central idea very straightforward. Actual versus plan. Variance analysis compares actual results with the annual business plan to determine favorable and unfavorable variances. That's really the heart of the topic.
So, imagine planning a road trip. You expected to spend $400. Instead, you spent $500. That's a variance. Now you ask why.
Exactly. Variance analysis is about explaining differences, not simply identifying that differences exist. Management wants to know what happened. Why were actual results different from expectations?
Here's something I think helps. Pretend the annual budget is your weather forecast. Actual performance is what the weather actually did. Variance analysis is explaining why the forecast and reality didn't match.
That's a useful mental picture. Budgets represent expectations. Actual results represent reality. Variance analysis bridges the gap between the two.
Now the words favorable and unfavorable sound simple, but they can trick people.
Right. Those terms simply describe whether the actual result was better or worse than planned from the company's perspective. They're labels for comparison. They're not moral judgments.
I like that clarification. People sometimes hear unfavorable and immediately panic. Sometimes it's simply telling you performance differed from the plan in an undesirable direction.
Exactly. And management's next question becomes, why? Was it temporary? Permanent? Operational? Economic? Variance analysis encourages investigation rather than assumptions.
So if we zoom out, this entire module really has one giant theme. Numbers become useful when they answer questions.
That's beautifully said. Ratios answer questions about profitability, liquidity, solvency, and performance. Variance analysis answers questions about differences between expectations and reality. Everything revolves around understanding relationships.
Before we wrap up, let's give listeners one final mental picture. Imagine standing in front of a dashboard with 5 gauges. Gauge 1 asks, are we earning profits? Gauge 2 asks, can we pay our upcoming bills? Gauge 3 asks, will we remain financially healthy over the long term? Gauge 4 asks, how effectively is management operating the business? And the 5th gauge asks, did actual performance match what we planned?
That's an excellent summary. And remember one more thing Becker emphasizes. Never treat ratios as perfect answers. Use them as indicators. Compare them across time, against competitors, and against industry averages. Always remember that accounting estimates, historical costs, fair values, and other information outside the financial statements can influence how meaningful those ratios really are.
So don't memorize formulas in isolation. Understand the question each ratio is trying to answer. That's what makes the formulas easier to remember.
Exactly. If you leave this episode remembering only 5 ideas, make them these. Profitability measures success. Liquidity measures short-term ability to pay obligations. Solvency measures long-term financial security. Performance metrics evaluate operating and investment performance. And variance analysis explains why actual results differ from the plan. Build everything else on top of that framework, and this entire module becomes much easier to organize in your mind.